On a train, in a bus, in a car, on the way to your job. All alone with your kids, with your wife, or with your dog. You can listen anywhere, you can listen everywhere, to the Philip Maloney podcast.
Hi, welcome back to the latest instalment of the Philip Maloney podcast. I'm very pleased to be joined today by David Booth. David is a father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. He has a full history working career where he started out with IBM, then later moved on to a small company called British Telecom, then onto things like defense contracts, and finished his career as VP with AT&t, one of the, if not the largest telecommunication companies in the world. So I am over the moon to be talking with David Booth today. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much, Philip. It's great to be here.
Lovely. Thank you for finding the time to join me on the Philip Maloney podcast. I know that we've got lots and lots to talk about, but what I want to assure you that we can take our time and we can have a lovely, full and thorough get to know each other. And with all my interviews, I always like to get to know a little bit more about the person. But before we get into that, I must say, I love the background. I love all the photos and the books and stuff. And we're going to certainly get into how old you are and how remarkably fit
Right.
you have kept yourself. So I want to put that caveat in the beginning because I definitely want to be speaking about that.
Right.
But let me find out more about you, David. I want to know about the man behind the silver dusting that we see before us today.
Right. Okay. Well, let's start at the end and move backwards because sometimes that's a little bit easier. I'm literally weeks away from my 80th. That's 80, not 18, sadly. 80th birthday. So there's a huge life behind me. Anybody who is quick at their maths, they'll realize that 80 means that I was born during the Second World War. And of course, that will have a bearing both in terms of who I am today, and will have a bearing on the transition that I basically from birth through to adulthood, because the Second World War impacted very severely on my, I suppose you could say, my childhood. Okay, so my wider history, which is actually even more fascinating, is probably you can tell from the accent I'm a Scotsman, a very proud Scotsman. I have a heritage that goes back hundreds of years, traced, so we actually know who was doing what to whom in the Highlands 400 years ago, right? Including against the English, so we'll leave it, but we'll leave that one on the table.
Let bygones be bygones.
Let bygones, but just for the next few minutes, okay? All right. So the most important thing for me is one of the early conversations that we had when we had our introduction was that if anybody asks me today, even at my tender age, if anybody asks me today what was the highlight of my life, the highlight of my life was my children. And that for me is and will always be till my dying breath. That will actually always be at the center of my life. There are implications that you're aware of behind that statement, but family to me is something that is so important. It's a heritage element, but it's also to do with the journey from childhood through to young adulthood, through career, completely through career, all the implications of that. into senior citizenship. Let's just leave it like that. And one of the things that I'm hoping today that you and I will hopefully briefly touch upon, but that's up to you, is that I would very much like to reach out to grandparents and great-grandparents who will have experienced, because of our ages, some of the similar backgrounds and the similar family impacts that certain events that many people just completely have forgotten about. So we actually now get to a situation where in just a few minutes I've taken you from 400 years ago and hopefully taken you up to a second ago.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely something that we're probably going to put a fair amount of time in, because it's an important message. It's a very important message. But before we do go into that,
Sure.
Let's bring it back to some of the fun stuff. I want to hear about you as a little wee lad.
As a wee lad.
Growing up, I suppose if you were in Scotland, there might not have been so many bombs raining, or am I right or wrong about that?
No, you're wrong. You're wrong because of course, because one of the things, sadly, actually not sadly, one of the things that you're going to hear is the dramatic twists and turns that my life has taken, and that started from year zero. All right, I am, and I'm very proud of it. I am the only loved son of a mother and a father. I told you that I appeared during the Second World War. So my father was a serving officer. He was seconded. He was in the Corps of Signals. He was seconded after a certain time, 1941. He was seconded to the British Army in India because the intention was that India, after Europe, would be one of the bastions that dare I say, Philip, the empire would defend. And from the bases in India, the area around Malaysia, where the UK had many commercial interests, that would be defended from India. So as an officer, he was actually able to bring his wife with him. They married in 1939. I appeared in 1941. So I like to think with the transition that I had in the early part of my marriage, where literally there were just the two of us until we started having children, and therefore we enjoyed our own company for the beginning years of the marriage. I would like to think that my mother and father had an interesting time together, but you'll understand that it was a challenging time because it was wartime.
Let me ask you. So your father was seconded to India. This is a very interesting part to me. So I'm going to indulge myself a little bit here, because that's my heritage, British Army in India. So I'm an Anglo-Indian, right? So I want to ask you a couple of So I want to ask you a couple of questions around that, because who knows, our relative history paths may well have crossed. So because my great-grandfather, Robert Maloney, was in the British Army. He was a company sergeant major, and he was also in India, obviously. So so whereabouts was your father stationed? Where did they?
In New Delhi. He was at military headquarters.
Right.
But I'm sure, Philippa, as an ex-army man, you will know, and I take you back to the wartime, which obviously you're too young to remember. But the Corps of Signals played a multiple role in the British Army. They were one of the key technology centers, specialists in the army. Therefore, what tended to happen, and this is the situation with my father, what tended to happen is that as a signaller, he actually was then himself seconded to various operational units, and he was responsible with his various teams, etc. He was responsible for the signals operations of individual regiments. So, for example, just to do a wee bit of a shortcut, so when he went from India, posted to Singapore in 41, and we'll just cover that a little bit. Go back to it. When he was seconded, he was initially seconded to the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, who were one of the operational regiments in Malaysia. But he was also seconded with the Gordon Highlanders, who are in fact the regimental unit, if you wish, from Aberdeen in the north of Scotland, which is where he, and I suppose to a certain extent, I come from. Yeah. So he in Malaysia, although he was a signaller, he actually was on the front line both with the Gordon Highlanders and the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders.
Yeah.
And just to close a loop, because we're going to go backwards and forwards.
Sure.
I can see that straight away. Just to close a loop, my family background on one side of the family, my maternal family background is very, very military, and primarily army. So my grandfather, who is the only member of my family prior to my mum and dad. My grandfather I never met. He was actually a sergeant who was serving at what I can euphemistically call the Northwest Frontier. And he was actually killed in 1933. So he was killed, 11 years before I was born. 12 years before I was born. He was the only person I didn't meet. I met my paternal grandfather and grandmother, and obviously my maternal grandmother. All right.
Yeah.
So
also, what I get from that, David, sorry to interrupt. What I get from that is that strangely, comms is deeply ingrained in your DNA. It's so much of your history. It's so much of you and everything that you've done in your career as well.
Yes, I have to say accidentally, because one of the small things that you actually maybe I didn't make clear when we had initial chat. One of the things that my father and grandfather, who I knew, Scottish grandfather, 6'4", red hair, ruled like a rod of iron, a professor, right? Because that side of the family were academic. One of the things that my grandfather and my father insisted on was that they would do their best to give me a reasonable education, but they wanted a quid pro quo from me that I would not waste that education, and that I would become a professional, or at least start my career as a professional. So immediately after school, I actually went down to London, and I joined a firm of lawyers in the City of London. So I actually got my LLB law degree, which was my initial degree, working as an article clerk in the City of London. And it was when I qualified and wanted to move forward with my life, the principal who was actually responsible for me at the law firm, he made the suggestion that I should do a second degree. And he suggested that because I was so au fait with the commercial world, that my second degree should actually be an MBA. So I actually did a Master's of Business Administration at Manchester Business School, and it was from Manchester Business School that I was headhunted to join IBM. So there's just a wee bit of the backstory.
Yeah, no, that's a lovely segue.
But the most important thing is, although I qualified as a lawyer, got my law degree, and I got my Law Society qualifications, the English Law Society qualifications, because as a Scotsman, our Law Society has a completely different background, etc., different structure and all the rest of it. So when I got past my finals for the English Law Society, one of the things that you're offered is a practicing certificate. So that allows you to practice as a lawyer. That's what I turned down in order to move forward to go to Manchester Business School and do an MBA. It was never in my gift to look beyond what the MBA would give me. It was just that I was taking advice from a principal who became my father, because during my articleship as a trainee lawyer, I lost my father. So my principal, who knew my father, which you'll find unusual, but during the wartime, especially in the officer ranks, a lot of people cross paths with each other, and so it never ceased to amaze me. Certainly in my more adult childhood, it never ceased to amaze me how many people appeared out of the woodwork of my father's age, who had known my father during the wartime, his wartime experience. Okay.
In support of you, so you were embraced by this fellowship or brotherhood.
Very much.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. No, that's a lovely secure
so
place
the communication aspect of it took a wee bit of a slumber during the law years, if you like, or the lawyer years. Although obviously communication was it became an absolute vital part of the law, especially on the commercial side, which was my forte. So for 4 or 5 years, there was the communications took a back seat, and then literally they hit me in the face when I joined IBM, because IBM, although everybody knows IBM, certainly in the old days they know IBM as a mainframe computer manufacturer, they had their fingers in technology pies that, well, were remarkable. Let's just put it like that.
Yeah, they were pretty far reaching. And I mean, research and development for them was everything. Everything got plowed back in, and they were looking at absolutely everything, like you say. Yeah, no, that's so as far as sort of career goes, it could be a given for the purpose of this conversation that you were successful in the areas that you applied yourself.
Yeah, I think I would like to see it. I would like to see it in a slightly more philosophical way. One of the things that my father and grandfather, and you'll understand from the conversation, they were key people in my young life. One of the things which they both said for me is that when I was happy in my career, to accept every challenge. So if somebody came along to you in your career and said, by the way, would you do this? The answer was always yes, sir. And that's a military philosophy. Although in the military, my dad used to say to me, the last thing that you were actually taught to do was to put yourself forward for any task. Anyway, we're going back to the career. On the whole, I think my career was successful, but because in the climbing of the greasy pole, I accepted so many tasks, you will understand that not all of those were successes. Some of those were failures. Some of those were personal failures because I did not perform correctly. Some of them were failures because I was in the wrong team with the wrong leadership at the right time, and therefore some of the elements of inverted commas failure were beyond me. But in a philosophical way, to start basically ground zero as a new recruit into IBM, even although I had a background at that stage in IBM, to start as a raw recruit in IBM and then 40 years later land up as a vice president of one of the largest companies in the world, you will understand that the progression was steady, but there were ups and downs. And I think one of the lovely things that I've learned in my life is I've actually learned from the challenges that I didn't meet. I also have learned from my failures, and maybe we will touch base on one of those, which actually relate to the family side at a later part. But I honestly believe that I would be giving you and anybody listening to this podcast the wrong impression if I said it was a golden road that started at mile zero and progressed without a blemish, etc., etc.
You're very wise to put that caveat in, certainly for when I start asking you questions around it. So well done, well played. Absolutely. But I think that shows a real humility to anybody. I think there's not one person who could say that they've had this smooth path. It's a real fallacy as to that ever happening to anybody, to your CEO. Most of the people that we observe as great successes have a huge a backlog of failures and challenges, etc., behind them.
And could I just underpin that by saying to you, ironically, that my last job with AT&T, that was actually a huge act of faith on their behalf, because they were actually buying, and let's not beat about the bush, that's what good companies do. They go out and try and buy skills and experience. And they were buying skills and experience from me at a time when I was in British Telecom, when British Telecom itself was going through that very, very awkward period where they were literally starting to downsize and dramatically downsize. I mean, BT at the beginning of when I joined them, they had 243,000 employees. And in the space of 18 months, they downsized to probably wiping out about 100,000 jobs, which is something that very few people are necessarily aware of, because it was
was this sort of very early 90s?
It was late 80s and early 90s. Okay, and one of the quid pro quos that BT entered into with the unions, because obviously the unions had to be brought on board, one of the quid pro quos was that BT did say that one of the ways in which they would start the ball rolling was by taking some of their most senior managers and putting them through the early retirement process. Hand up, I was one of those. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So I my latter part of BT was going through that strange period, but actually AT&T, when they realized publicly that I was actually on the job market, they moved. Apparently, they heard on a Tuesday I had a first-class plane ticket to fly out to New York for the initial interview on the Friday.
Right. So they were really conscious of the talent grab that was about to happen from this cull, as it were. Of BT downsizing. Okay, so that must have been a very, very interesting time and period in your life.
Yes.
But I can see the act of faith as well.
Sure, absolutely. Because don't misunderstand me. I had actually, because of the work that I did within BT, I had actually got a long history with AT&T because. I take you back to the 1980s when what the big telecom companies were doing, and primarily that was AT&T, BT, and Nippon Telecoms in Japan. What we were trying to do was to put a high bandwidth necklace of communication facilities around the world, so that de facto, with my background in the City of London, de facto, I was in an operation where at 7 o'clock each morning, part of my team accepted the responsibility for communications on behalf of the City of London from Nippon Telecoms in Japan, or Japan Telecoms as it became. And at the close of play, we actually handed that over to New York. So there was actually a continuity. What people probably fail to understand in those days, because the management of such a massive task was actually relatively new, that was something which allowed me to have very good access to AT&T skills and management, etc. So they knew me, if you like, before they moved for me.
Sure. Okay, no,
but can I just say something to you? We've jumped to the end, and the end is. And the end was dramatic. I have to tell you, there's a whole raft of things that maybe we might cover at some other stage, but the beginning was dramatic, and I think we should go back to the beginning, because that's going to make a lot more sense. Okay,
sorry, what beginning?
A beginning of me.
Yes. Well, sure, absolutely. I mean, we started with you getting a law degree, so please.
No. I want to go even further back.
Yes.
Because so I go back to my birth. I will tell you that I was born, I believe it was a Thursday. My father at the time was actually undertaking, as you will know, specialist training. In fact, he was actually undertaking his specialist jungle training in India, about to be posted to Malaysia. And I came into this world kicking and screaming on a Thursday, and he was allowed a weekend leave. I can't remember what the military phrase was, but he was allowed military leave to come and visit me, and because he had to travel, because the leave started when he left the camp, he had 1 weekend to get from the jungle to the military hospital in Delhi to see me, and then to get back into the jungle. So my dad actually saw me and held me for a matter of minutes on that weekend. Wow. That's at the end of July. In August, he's on a troop ship to Malaysia. On December of 1941, so I'm 6 months old, not quite 6 months old, he becomes a prisoner of the Japanese. And for 4.5 years, 5 years, he is one of the thousands of prisoners of war of the Japanese. And so I actually never met my father until I was 6 years old.
Wow.
And so all of that young childhood, all of those crucial years when we cement the relationship between mother and father and sibling and child. In all those years, I was fully aware that he existed. I was fully aware that he was alive. I hoped that he would survive, but I never met him until 6. And one of the first things that he told me, Philip, which sticks to me to this day, one of the first things that he told me was that because of me, he survived the Japanese prisoner of war camps. So, and you'll understand that the bond that then built, and obviously he came back a broken man. He'd undergone horrendous torture, horrendous situation. He was on the Burma Road. I could tell you a bit about that, but I don't want to go too much in there. But
did they recognize who he was and what part he was playing in the war?
No. What was absolutely fascinating? Was when it was clear that the generals in Malaysia were going to surrender. And remember, you have to just take a deep breath and remember that the Allied forces, the British, Indian, Australian, New Zealand forces in Malaysia at that time were over 60,000. And the Japanese landed 2 armies in the north of Malaysia, so about 30,000 men. And the generals in Malaysia, actually in Singapore, surrendered very, very, very abruptly. There's a story which I've never been able to get to the bottom of, but the key thing about it was that when they realized that all the officers were going to become prisoners, and they knew that the signal officers were actually probably going to be singled out, because they were key to the communication, the skills and knowledge that they had. So actually, just before the surrender, my father was posted from the Corps of Signals to the pay corps of the Indian Army in Singapore, so that actually when he was captured as a pay corps officer with the Indian Army. All right.
Okay. Yeah. So, well, that's either very insightful or very, very lucky. I think some of the senior management, some of the senior officers below the generals in Malaysia at the time, and these were officers from across the board. These were Brits, Anzacs, Indians, etc. Some of them were very, very insightful and very experienced, and I'm very grateful, because had the Japanese realized that they'd captured a major of the British Army Corps of Signals, he would never have survived. Wonderful, David.
Okay. So just go back very quick. So it's very important. That's a sideline, but it's very important that when he came back from the war, I was told by all the family who cared for me that I would not have him for long, because he was just he was such a broken man and all the rest of it. So the bond with my father began at 6, and sadly, it was a remarkable journey that we had together. Sadly, he died when I was 19. So at least I had him for 13 years. Yeah, which a lot of people say brilliant, but a lot of those 13 years, he, because of his illnesses, because of certain aspects of the environment, etc. I didn't actually have him. He's in hospital or whatever. Okay.
Yeah, because I can imagine that during a stint as a Japanese prisoner of war, you were malnourished. You were subject to psychological trauma, tortures. etc., and all the rest of it. So effectively, with the full intent of leaving people broken and completely sort of battered both physically and mentally. But what I wanted to get into here while we're at it is you as a 6-year-old boy. The years before that must have been like a blink when you actually got the time with your father to have that initial meeting. I can imagine there had been times where the days seemed like forever until you actually got into that point. So what did it mean to you at the time before you saw your father and the stories, etc., and how did it then sort of transpire into having that time? What did you get from the time with your father after that?
The amazing reticence. Whether that was official or not, I don't know. The amazing reticence of talking to me about his experiences. I appreciate that I was only 6, but I was a very, very adult 6. Those first 6 years, when the British Army realized that my father was a prisoner of war, they allowed my mother and I to live in officers' accommodation in New Delhi. So on the military base. So for those first 6 years, I was surrounded by military. I was surrounded by meeting military mothers, military children of my similar age, etc., etc. So I was immersed in the military in the early days, and grew up very, very quickly. I hope I'm not opening wounds for you, but actually
no.
Living.
I know very little
living
about
on a military base. I don't know if it's happened to you. Living on a military base as a child is unbelievably stressful because the whole ethos is around fighting. Therefore, the kids fought with each other. The girls and the boys fought. Okay, so you can take that as it will. So I grew up very quickly at 6 years old. But come back. Amazing reticence to talk about his experiences. That changed because again, I don't want any negativity to creep into our discussion, but I will have to touch on some aspects of my background which might be interpreted as negative. When my mother saw, and if she was alive, she'd tell you this herself. When my mother saw my father, when he came back with no clothes, saw the scars, saw the missing parts of his body, she just couldn't touch him. And in fact, from that time to his death, they actually didn't share a bedroom. Now, I raise that not as a criticism of my mum, because I do understand, because I saw his body as well. But what actually used to happen is, I'm remembering this around about 9 years old, maybe 10 years old. He used to have the most horrendous nightmares, unbelievable. And my bedroom was the nearest bedroom to his bedroom. So many, many nights, it would be me who would actually go to him, crawl into bed with him and hold him. So the bond between him and I grew to the extent where he was fully aware that I could actually feel the scars all over his body, big lumps and all the rest. I won't go into the details.
Sure.
So when I actually became his comforter, he started to open up about how he'd got these things, not in detail, you understand, Philip, but just gave me
as a father to his child.
As a father to his child, right? Okay. And I have, and now I need to say something very, very briefly, and we'll skip over it very quickly. This example of reticence was repeated time and time again in my life. I met many, many people whose fathers had been prisoners of war, some with the Japanese, some with the Germans, and all of them just reimbursed or reinforced my analysis that fathers didn't talk about what had happened in the prisoner of war camps. In fact, fathers didn't actually talk an awful lot about the war, full stop. Okay, and I met a lot of people who had been prisoners of war, including some who'd been with my father, some who'd actually been in the same hut as him, etc. So I was always searching for knowledge about that really dark period, just in a way, just to fill in holes. And I give you two examples of how stupid I became. Was in order to try and understand better, while I was in IBM, and I'm really growing up now. I'm a real adult now. IBM gave me the facility of learning a foreign language. I chose Japanese, just so that I could speak to, or potentially read, which is horribly difficult to do, but I could speak to people if I had the chance to ever meet them. And I did meet them. In my working life, with it actually happened with British Telecom probably more. In my working life, I had in the City of London with British Telecom, I had a tremendous amount of interaction with Bank of Japan, some of the big investment houses, etc. And a lot of the people that I had interactions with were of my father's generation. So I was able to speak Japanese to them. Never quite broke through what they did in the war and all the rest of it, but established a liaison. And now I take you to the second thing, which you're going to find fascinating. I'm here in Scotland. I learn from a television program that Chris Hoy, do you know Chris Hoy, the cyclist?
Yep.
One of his relations had actually served in had actually been a prisoner of war in Japan. Okay, and I reached out to try and have a meeting with that individual. Okay, through Chris Hoy and through the sporting organizations. Sadly, that individual died, but through my attempts, I came in contact with a Aberdonian of my father's age who served in the war in the Gordon Highlanders and was a prisoner of war. And for the first time in my life, this would have been about five years ago, for the first time in my life, I met somebody who was willing to sit down with me and talk about his experiences. And I am so proud, because it would not have been something that would have happened otherwise. I'm so proud that the man in question, and I'll name him, he's a brilliant man, Alistair Urquhart from the Gordon Highlanders. When during some of our meetings, I persuaded him that he should write a book, because there were many people like me who wanted to know. And over my right shoulder, you'll see a book, which is The Forgotten Highlander by Alistair Urquhart. And I just take my hat off to Alistair that he actually, as a result of our conversations, he then went on to write that book about it. But that's only happened. Alistair sadly has died now, but that's only happened in the last 5 years. So
wow.
So in
Incredible.
that period from 6 to 19. the bond father-son was absolutely unbelievable. The bond mother to son was looser than the father-son relationship. Okay, mother wanted more than one child. That her ambition in her married life was to have 3 children, but obviously when father came back from war, he just couldn't do the necessary. So I remained the only son, and I often wondered whether one of the things that in her heart of hearts that my mother wanted was actually a daughter, a daughter, a sister for me. So
well, my mother has 5 children, and I'm the youngest of 5,
right.
And she always wanted a daughter, but she's got 5 sons. So
Right.
you can imagine what a disappointment I was to my mother. Right. So,
I'll tell you a different story. My wife, her ambition before when we got married, or before we got married, her ambition was to have 11 boys.
Wow.
And we had 5. We had 5 children in the end, but 2 of them were boys, 3 were daughters.
Yeah. So I can understand the frustrations that might have been there in the background. But that's a wonderful. I mean, look, you've painted a wonderful picture of what it would have been like at that encampment, military housing, officers' quarters, etc. Your father coming home from that experience, and then your mother just sort of her worst fears realized. Her inability to not succumb to those feelings through the man that she loved, etc., and having all of those turmoils herself to come to terms with, and just finding it difficult or near on impossible. But then your time with your father, as you say there, consoling him and allowing him to open up to you with his experiences, etc. And even the moment of running your fingers over those scars and lacerations, etc. That's incredibly visual and vivid, to me, as to what that must have been like. And as a 6-year-old boy growing up through those experiences, you must have had a incredible bond, like a flash of bonding to your father that was all of a sudden realized through having had him been absent, but then with the officers around you as well to sort of offer that guidance of a fatherly experience.
And could I make a point again? This is in no way a comment on the general ambiance, but could I just make the point that this was the British military headquarters in New Delhi was an incredibly active environment. People coming in the whole time, training, people coming from because obviously through India eventually you get the Chindits and they're going across to Burma and trying to do a sideways attack on the Japanese, etc. So it's an incredibly active camp, but you will also remember, and I'm sure this was the case with you with the various messes you might have been in, it was actually a very social place. So I actually met a tremendous number of young, very, very, very fit, very, very. I always remember them as being well educated, which conditioned me for the future. But I actually remember my mum's house actually being a party house during that time. Not on a one-on-one. I'm not making comments like that. But my mum used to entertain, and it was lovely. It was an experience. And what was lovely for me, one of the strongest memories that I take away from that period, although I was so young, was that because I was the son of an officer in a prisoner of war camp, I was given, if you like, I was treated very well. If you understand, okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was lovely. And that I remember touching the lives of many people who sadly then went on and were killed. But I remember well that the fact that this huge British military base in New Delhi was a very active and social place. And,
Yeah, wonderful. I must enter my own caveat there, because I don't want to be accused of any stolen valor. I was never in India. I was never in India during that any military periods. This is more my father's and his father. But me, I was I'm far too used to the trappings of West London, Middlesex during the sort of early 80s, etc. So I've never seen anything like that, apart from a short stint at the Army Cadets in Heston.
Right. Well done.
Yeah, so we'll get that there. So as far as I certainly understand the terminology mess and what that means and what have you, and even the culture through the sort of the British Indian coming together, etc. That to me is very, very close to home. But listen, that gives us a really good point to move into another aspect. Dare I say it, an even more emotive aspect of your life. So you're this young man, you're continuing to be more and more successful in your career, you're forging your way. I'd like you to move on now to you starting your own family.
Yes,
and given the background of your childhood, what were your motivations in starting a family? What did you want to achieve that was different, or that we all have those moments where we say, I never ever want this to happen to me and my family moving forward as children. Even we have those sort of foresight moments. So please.
Okay. The reason why I think it's been useful to cover up to the point now is that you will understand that I'm conditioned by family heritage, and I'm conditioned very much by the child's family influences, the threats and pressures of potentially losing my father at any time, etc., etc. So I'm in law. I'm in the City of London. This is the beginning of the 1960s. London is humming. I have the most fantastic life. I'm playing top-class rugby during the winter. I'm also lucky enough to be playing top-class cricket as well in the summer. So I'm leading an incredibly active, incredibly social life. I am meeting a lot of very, very beautiful, vivacious, slightly scatty. Oops, that's my thing just fallen off. Slightly scatty. I can hear.
I think I know what you were going to say.
Slightly scatty ladies, which was great fun. But strangely enough, I always had a perception deep down that when I found the woman I would marry, she would actually be a lot more stable, that she would be a lot more thoughtful, that she would be the potential mother that I wanted for my children. And remarkably, I found this lady at a party, and she was a fully qualified state registered nurse, but had moved fairly quickly away from the hospital environment and joined British Airways. So she was having quite a good life at the time as well. And we clicked. There was a realization from both of us that we'd actually found our potential life partners. And that was important to me because that actually conditioned the next 25 years. Because when we married in 1965, our marriage actually lasted, and the last 2 years sadly were divorced, but our marriage actually lasted until 1990. So 25 years of marriage, and I knew her for 2 years before we got married, and our philosophy always was that we would like to have a big family. Neither of us knew whether we were able to have children. That's probably pushing the bounds of credibility a bit far, but both of us are fit and young. Let's put it. The significant thing, though, and the attraction for me, because she's a slightly more stable person. She was nearly 3 years older than me. So if you can imagine a 25-year-old man with a 28-year-old woman, it doesn't sound an awful lot, but actually it was significant. None of my friends had girlfriends, fiancés, wives older than them. I was the first. Okay.
Yeah.
And we had all she was actually looking for somebody who could do three things, and three things that I agreed to, right? One was she was looking for somebody with a potential future, with a good potential financial future, who could look after her. Because I didn't realize until our honeymoon that she actually dropped the wee bombshell on my shoulders that she now considered that she never had to work again.
Okay. Yeah.
And for 23 years of our marriage, she never worked. I mean, she worked. She was a housewife, a mother.
So let's say. I mean, I don't see that as an unreasonable request. There are different folks, different strokes, as it were.
Sure.
With regards to her intentions, but could you provide me a little bit more of her background? English is
English.
Yep. So
Scottish. Sorry, Scottish.
Right. Okay. So you had a lot of similarities, etc. So there wasn't any conflict of geography. There wasn't any conflict of seeing as she was Scottish as well. She was probably quite straight and to the point. She had lived in England for a considerable time, so.
Although she was adamantly Scottish, anybody meeting her for the first time would actually have thought maybe that she was English. And by the way, that's an allegation that's been made at me from time to time.
Sure.
Praise the Lord, I've even been taken for an Australian, but not to worry.
Yeah.
So we actually had a very interesting period leading up to the marriage, because you need to understand one other element that doesn't make sense if I don't tell you now, is that that when my mother lost my father to cancer, eventually one of his war wounds in his stomach turned cancerous, and he died in Westminster Hospital in London. When my mother lost my father, one of the early things that she did was to find a second husband. And
Right.
so when I started going out with my wife to be, she and I were getting to know this second father, if you want to understand. So it was interesting because I was having some interesting conflicts of my own, because I wasn't initially, when I was told before I met the guy, I was a little bit surprised. I was surprised how quickly my mother had moved.
Mm.
But may I just tell you one thing, so that we just get this right on the table? He became my second father. He was
Right.
as different from my biological father as chalk and cheese. He was my biological father is active, Scottish, outgoing, be in a party. If there's a piano there, he'll sit down and he'll play the piano. If there's a good, played brilliant sport, etc., etc., etc. My second father was academic, introverted, very shy, very, very reticent to express his opinions, but he and I became friends in a way that was just remarkable. So at the time that I'm going out with my wife prior to the wedding, I'm beginning to build a relationship, not just with her, but I'm beginning to build a relationship with my second father.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you asked me specifically is, one of the common goals that my wife and I had in establishing a family was a big family. I joked with you that she wanted 11 boys. There was no bloody way that I was going to have 11 boys. I tell you that.
Well, you're an elite athlete, but even elite athletes have their limits, right?
Thank you very much indeed, Philip. Right. So we always knew, but one of the things that she said, and it was part of the grown-up part of her character, which actually attracted me. One of the things she said is, when we get married, she wanted 2 years to 3 years of just her and I to enjoy the marriage.
Right.
She did not want children immediately, but when we agreed that the children should come along, and we had good communication together, when we agreed that the children came along, she wanted 2 children close together, and then a break, so that we could enjoy those 2 children, and the 2 children could formulate a bond. And then she wanted what I euphemistically call other children, and we always had this debate whether it was 2 more children or 3 more children. All right.
Right.
In the end, it actually was 3 more children, and they actually had a wonderful upbringing, because not only did they have the love of their mother and their father, but also they had 2 older siblings who had bonded already. So in a way, they were old enough to be able to be mentors to the 3 youngsters. Right?
That sounds like a fantastic plan. A really good family strategy.
Yep. Well, it's an interesting strategy, because it's worked against me. Well, we'll come to that. Okay. This is part of that. This is part of that.
No, but I think there's a real sort of endearment to that. A woman who knows exactly what she wants.
Correct.
From a partner, strong enough
from
to
a 25-year-old man's point of view.
Well, you're busy as well,
Absolutely.
aren't you? You're working at this time, what are you sort of looking at? BT? Are you still
No.
lawyer?
During I hate to use the word, but my brain's a bit courtship. During our courtship, I'm just finishing the law, and
so how old are you at this point?
25.
Okay. Oh, so that's right. 25.
25, and she's 28. Okay. So
yeah.
So
she knows her mind is what I'm.
That's right. Exactly.
I'm trying to get at, and that can be quite useful for you, not to have to think about the sort of the planning of a family. You've found yourself a woman who is taking that planning.
Thank you. Good.
On her to allow you to grow and blossom and be able to provide for her and the children.
Absolutely spot on. And the way you've just put it reminds me that probably that was actually some of my thought process as a 25-year-old.
You've been attracted to that, right?
Yep,
you found this woman that's going to allow you to take on exactly what you want to take on and achieve exactly what you want to achieve for the benefit of having in your mind a wonderful, beautiful, wholesome family, and move forward with that.
Sure. Yeah. Which actually worked for most of the time. The marriage was actually a good marriage. There were, as in every marriage, there were ups and downs, and the downs were quite deep, but were overcome very, very quickly, and the ups were good ups, and the ups tended to focus on the children. Although I had my career, wherever possible, and I was in the UK, wherever possible, I tried to make sure that the weekends were actually for my children. Okay. If I wasn't able to see them during the week because I had to leave home early in the morning to get to the office early, if I didn't see them because they were asleep by the time I came back from my busy day, weekends were, from my point of view, children time. Okay.
Okay. Good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So back to 25. Back to the 3-year sabbatical, maybe, but back to the 3-year process of you two finding each other, and taking that time before children. What did that consist of?
That consisted, and remember, she's not working. I have a relative stroke of incredible luck. That's the only way I can put it. I've had luck, and I've had good luck, and I've had bad luck in my life. Sure. One of the things that was remarkable for me was when you join IBM in those days. When you join IBM, basically everybody, whether you're going to be an accountant in IBM, whether you're going to be whatever, the broad thing, you are given absolute grounding in computing. And actually, vis-a-vis our chat a little bit earlier on, computing and communication. All right. So everybody, despite whatever their career is likely to be, they are given this incredible grounding in computing, and within 6 months, probably shorter than that, within 4 months of joining IBM, I'm already programming as a systems programmer. I'm programming mainframe computers in machine code. So I'm actually at the bits and bytes level, right? I'm not talking about any high level languages. So the training, and this will be a theme that I will refer to constantly, the training that I received from IBM was absolutely world class. second to none, and something which I am eternally grateful for. All right. So the good luck was that one of the first positions I was given was actually as a computer engineer, and I was superbly lucky that I was seconded to a small team in the city of London, who, with a small company called Lloyd's Bank, were developing a technology that would allow them to have what we called cash dispensers, but you now know in everyday use as an ATM. And I was on that team that developed the first ATM in the world. And if you were to Google the first IBM ATM in the world, you would immediately recognize what you face in the hole in the wall even today. So I was involved in a technology that has lasted for 40 plus years, 50 years, is it? Whatever it is, okay? So, but the benefit to me was not, because one of the greatest things you could do in IBM, other than become senior manager, one of the greatest things you could do in IBM was actually to be part of bringing to life a new product, which IBM were going to make revenue and profit from, and they rewarded you as a result of that. Sure. And as a result of that, I was able to buy the most beautiful house. My house for life. I would love one day to show you a picture. My house for life, 5 bedrooms. You have to remember this is back in the 60s. 5 bedrooms, swimming pool, 5 acres of land. It used to be an old farmhouse for a 1,500-acre orchard. The next door farmer bought the acreage so that he now had 4,000 acres of fruit farm. The farmhouse was redundant, but one of the lovely things that he offered me was that he did not want any boundary between our garden and the fruit farm. So literally, we had dogs. So literally, when the dogs went out of the back door, the dogs went on to 4,000 acres of fruit farm.
Sounds amazing. So and this is all through the cash machine.
Yeah, through very good luck, very good early luck with IBM. So now you understand that we actually had, and my wife actually had even better, the most fabulous social life, a beautiful house. People were absolutely fascinated to come and visit, not just locals, not just local people who were older than us, but friends of ours from London. This was in Kent, by the way. Friends of ours from London used to come down. So it was a very social environment, even although I was working very hard. And the other thing that we bonded on, obviously she'd given up her stewardessing with British Airways. The other thing we bonded on was our love of travel. So for that sabbatical, as you so succinctly put it, we did a lot of travel together. Okay.
So when you say you were lucky, you were extremely lucky. Did this happen before you had your first child?
Yes.
Wow.
In fact, one of the reasons why we decided to buy this particular farmhouse was it was just. I mean, if you just saw it, you would say, split second, you would say that's a family house.
Right.
And when we decided to buy it, that actually we obviously wanted to do it up, so we wanted to spend a year, 18 months doing it up. But that was going to be our family home for for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. So you're between so this is in Kent. You're working in London. You have all the social trappings of London and the rest of the world in the 1960s with,
Yep.
modern travel, etc. It's a real boom time. Now, your intentions and your mindset, along with your wife, was family. It
Yep.
wasn't sort of like frivolous excursions or what have you. You had all this money. You could have gone crazy with it, right?
Absolutely.
2 young people, no children or what have you. But your mind was the procreation and the moving forward of
Thank you.
Your legacy.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so that's a good place to be.
Yeah,
that's a good place to be. Okay.
Because I'm not going to speak on your behalf because that's totally unfair. But I am here today, Philip, talking to you because of 2 lovely people who were in love with each other and decided to have me, right?
Yeah.
And what I garnered from that particular foundation, I suppose.
Yeah.
So would you accept that foundation into my life? That's what I was looking for. I was looking for somebody who would actually replicate that lovely bringing into this life a new human existence. Okay.
Yeah. I'll tell you how I liken it in this story, and it's fascinating how these parallels do get drawn. But if you look at you can call it coincidental, but if you look at why IBM gave you intensive training at the beginning, was probably because they were creating a culture within their organization.
Yes.
Now, in order for them to give you a culture within the organization, they have to embed you with an understanding of what you are when you are with IBM.
Yes.
And you have to sing accordingly. You have to dance to that rhythm. Okay.
Yes.
Now, when you get a load of money and you think to yourself, what am I going to create? You create your own culture. And if that culture is based around a beautiful family home, then you're creating, in my opinion, a noble culture. Regardless of whatever happens outside of that, the intentions are to create a noble culture.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And even more importantly, because this is a wonderful boom time, end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s. This was a wonderful boom time for UK PLC. Global opportunities were fantastic. A lot of my friends who did not work for big companies, a lot of my friends were actually in the city and worked for banks, insurance companies, etc. But for a lot of my friends at that time who were in smaller operations, their future, their culture was driven towards them starting their own business as opposed to starting their own family. All right. Yeah. So the stability of IBM and the luck that went with it actually enabled me to actually fulfill that the drive within myself and my wife that we wanted to have good home, nice kids, etc., etc.
Yeah, yeah. So
leave out the nice kids, all right?
Let's. Well, look. Okay, so this is the difficult part of the conversation that we're going to come into now, and we find ourselves at the, with our toes dangling over what is a cliff edge of just having to watch our words, having to be careful. In this time period, people have become deceased, etc. So we're gonna go through this really respectfully and on the understanding that our hearts are open and our intentions are solely good intentions. Okay. So with that in mind, this initial intention of yours to start a family, I don't want to go into what it was like as a family, what it was like as you growing up. Sorry, what it was like necessarily as having that day-to-day activity. I think we need to. I think we need to sort of put the caveat in that it's a given that you procreated 5 times,
Yep.
and you made 5 children, and you were working in the pinnacle of your career.
They're over my shoulder.
Beautiful that
Those
they
are
are.
the 5 children. Okay?
Yeah, no. I can see that. There's
my second wife are the big photographs,
Right.
but you might just be able to see the 3 daughters who, and ironically, are the loves of my life.
Listen, I totally get that, and we've also
Go for it.
We're going to come back and forth. We're going to come back and forth into the nuances, into the personalities of your children, and your late partner, and both of your late partners, etc. And that's no problem at all. But I think that what we need to do is we need to just understand that there's an undertone here.
Go into the tension elements.
Yeah. So, well, okay. So I
haven't disappeared. I'm just getting.
I want you to tell me where your intentions started to crumble in regards to your relationships. I want you to sort of fast forward into the. What would it be now? How many years into your relationship?
When it went wrong.
Yeah. What was the sort of
23 years? 23 years of marriage.
Yeah. So
I'll place this. I hope this doesn't shock you, but I'll actually place the specific. Okay. Tuesday, the 28th of June, 1988. All right. That's when the fireworks went up. Okay.
Yeah. So I would remember that as a glorious, long, endless summertime as a child.
Yes.
So I've got a good idea of what one of those Tuesdays would have been like. Yes. In a very different way. But for you, this was the day, and it's time stamped.
Yep, time stamped.
It's time stamped in your mind.
On my heart, in my mind, maybe in other parts of my body. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Okay. You might have got kicked there. Yeah. Sure.
one or 200,000 times.
Yeah, I can imagine. Right.
I can't.
Take me through it.
Very simple. We've got a lovely house now, living in the Cotswolds, in Gloucestershire. My job is British Telecom. I'm in the City of London. I made a decision, or maybe I made a decision because I was asked to. I made a decision that I would actually live at home and commute each day to my office. So the drive is nearly 3 hours, 2.5 hours on a good day, in the fogs, and in the winter, sometimes as long as 4 hours. That was home to office.
Right.
I'm now a senior manager in British Telecom. I'm putting in at least 8, maybe 10-hour days, and then I'm driving home.
Right.
So if you just get the picture, the kids.
I'm thinking every single service station on the M4 like the back of your hand at this point.
Absolutely. Even the petrol stations off the M4, because sometimes you used to have to do ducking, diving, and all the rest of it. Maidenhead and Tame and even ducking into Oxford, etc. Blah blah. Anyway, yeah. So the picture now is very different. 23 years
You're
of
grafting.
Five children. The reason why I've made this slightly obtuse comment to you was that a lot of my friends in Gloucestershire who were well aware of the job that I did. I mean, make no bones of it. A lot of them were saying to me, for God's sake, David, why the hell don't you get a pied-à-terre in London? Even just a one-bedroom pied-à-terre.
Yeah.
Save yourself the absolute horror of 220-mile drive a day.
Yeah, sure. So head off on a Sunday evening, come back on a Friday night.
And the reason why I'm a little bit careful now is because one of the things that my wife at the time said, if you go off to have a pied-à-terre in London during the week, she said, I'm not sure if that means the marriage is going to last. Okay.
Yeah.
So I wanted the marriage to last. So that is why for what was it? It was 6 years. You got to understand. I was doing this journey. Well, certainly for 5 years. I was doing this journey for 5 years. Okay. The job was relatively UK based, although it was global in its dimensions. I'm running a team that's looking after a lot of some of the biggest companies in the City of London. Yeah. Let me just give you the other snapshot, because this is where it becomes slightly more clear to anybody listening, and probably to yourself. Children, from day one, when they could understand my voice, children were always told that, to the best of my ability, not only will I give them a house, a roof over their heads, food in their bellies, clothes on their backs, and all the lovely frills that I could afford, but I made a commitment to them as young people, which I reinforced. I would, to the best of my ability, give you each a private education. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we were doing in Gloucestershire, which was, we moved there largely at the request of my wife, because she liked the sound of the Cotswolds, etc., etc., etc. We'll leave that by the by. But we found for all of the 5 children, Steiner School, which would take them from kindergarten to 18. So they were together. I boarded. I've been in boarding school since the age of 3. Mm-hmm. So we'll just leave that to one side. And I was determined that my children wouldn't board, because I remember what the implications of boarding are all about. So this was a day school. They're all in the same school. So from my wife's point of view, because I'm working from my wife's point of view, from convenience, she has to deliver, or eventually they provided a bus that picked them up to go to school, etc. So it was very convenient. It was one thing. We got to know all the teachers, we got to know the parents, we got to know the other children from kindergarten to 18. Yeah. Brilliant. Okay. So Tuesday, 28th of June, 1988, phone call from my wife. I'm in the office, one of the usual busy days, Philip, but we'll put that one by the by. And she's in tears, and she's asked me, can I come home? So I said, absolutely. No. She wouldn't talk about anything on the phone. So I realized it was something serious. And obviously the first thought that I had, it was one of the children, or all of the children. They were all at school at the time in June. So hightailed it back to the cottage in the Cotswolds. And that's where the bombshell hit. And I need you, and I need anybody listening to this, to understand this was a complete bolt out of the blue. Number one was that she was having an affair and had an affair for nearly a year with one of the senior teachers at the children's school. In fact, the way that the Steiners are structured, each of the children have like a year teacher, a year mentor, and he had been mentor to 4 out of my 5 children. They always say the wife in the female situation and the man in the male situation, the husband or the wife are always the last to know. It was only in the ensuing days that I realized that it was common knowledge that she and this guy were having an affair. Everybody appeared to know. So that was the first bombshell, but then there was a subsequent bombshell, and I don't really want to get too deep into this, not because it's contentious, because all the records are there and all the rest of it, but he apparently, my wife's lover, he apparently had got into some short-term financial difficulty, and my wife, who was the I forget what the phrase is now, guardian for her mother, who was if I just tell you, her mother was in a secure nursing home.
Right. Okay.
So
sometimes you could have a guardian attorney.
Whatever it was, but the DHSS in the old days, the Department of Health and Social Security, which is now the DWP, the DHSS paid my wife all the monies for the upkeep and the payment for the care for the home, for the secure nursing home, to my wife to then pay to the nursing home. And I understand why she couldn't do it. She couldn't approach me, but because she couldn't ask me, obviously, for money for her lover, right? So what she actually did is she took some money that from the DHSS payments that should have gone to the nursing home. I won't go into the details because that's not relevant. But
look,
what is relevant?
I can understand why you want to get that point out. Sure. I totally understand it, but I think you're right. It's not relevant.
Well, it is relevant because it actually starts to set the immediate timetable, because the reason why she had asked me to come back was that she'd received a registered letter from the nursing home saying that that the nursing home were aware that she'd received money from the DHSS, but had not paid it to her, and therefore the nursing home were aware that there was a potential
misappropriation of funds.
There was a potential theft, which was the word that absolutely panicked her. Okay. And what the nursing home did in the letter was to give her 7 days to sort the whole thing out. So the reason why I was brought back from London was the continued bombshell that she'd talked to her lover. The lover was incapable of repaying the money at that particular time, that he couldn't actually help her. And therefore, he advised her she had to come clean to me. And he said that when she had to decide that when she made it public to me that she was in this affair, she had to decide what she wanted to do for her future, whether she wanted to start a new life with him because he was willing to give up his family for her, or whether she wanted to continue with the marriage. And she informed him that she wanted a new life with him, significantly, please, Philip, without her children. And therefore, the continuation of the discussion on that Tuesday lunchtime was that she was then asking me for an ending to the marriage. But I understand how she was fairly brazen about it, because by that time I don't think she got anything to lose. She then asked me to pay the money for the monies that were stolen from the DHSS.
Right.
Now, here is the first criticism of David Booth. All right. I could have said, because
I'll be the judge of that.
Thank you. I could have said, yes, I acknowledge the end of the marriage, because it was the final straw in a sequence of events. All right, which she'd been involved in. It was the final straw. Yes, I could have said, yes, I'll agree to the end of the marriage and therefore a divorce process to begin. Mm-hmm. She made it clear to me that she did not want the children to be in her life. She knew how close the children were to me. And I said again, I would look after the children, but I could not look after the children in the Cotswolds and hold down a job in London. I just physically would have been impossible. Mm-hmm. And we talked through that scenario, and that's where within an hour, maybe the brains are a wee bit confused, but certainly within 2 hours. We agreed a very calm, very logical way forward. All that she wanted was me to take the children away. That therefore meant I had to remove them from the Cotswold Steiner School. And we were all aware that there was a beautiful Steiner School in Hertfordshire, just north of London. And were that to be a possible transfer, then I could work my job and look after my kids. But I refused to pay the money for what had happened with the DHSS, and that you can turn around and criticize me about. The net result of that was the kids were due back from school at I don't know what, 4 o'clock, and I said to my wife, the only thing that I've got 7 days before potentially the police come knocking at your door asking what you've been doing with DHSS money, and maybe the DHSS will come knocking at your door before then, because maybe the care home will actually let them know. So I knew that I had 7 days before the balloon would go up. So basically I said to my wife, I will actually head back to London now. This would have been about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock-ish, before the kids came back from school. And I will start to look for a house, and B, I will start to make arrangements to see whether the Steiner School in Hertfordshire would actually take the children. It was amicable. Neither of us lost our temper. Neither of us. I think both of us were absolutely. I think she was surprised at my reaction, how calm I was. I was just numb. I was numb because I didn't expect this to happen. And I will tell you this, that within 48 hours from me leaving the Cotswolds, and I actually went to a hotel in St Albans, and within 48 hours I'd found a 5-bedroomed house for rent about 2 miles away from the Steiner School in Hertfordshire. On that next day, I'd actually had a meeting with the senior teachers at the Steiner School, who actually agreed. They They didn't want to know the detail, the circumstances, but they said that they would make some discreet inquiries. But I'd agreed that by that time, the 4 children, because my eldest daughter had actually just left home. Mm-hmm. So they agreed that the 4 children would come to the Steiner School in Hertfordshire. Mm. So, and remarkably, my wife and I were talking on the phone. I was updating her, etc., on the progress. So this is Tuesday was the start. Wednesday, Thursday. This is Thursday, and what I agreed with her was that, bearing in mind that the balloon would go up the next week, I would come back to the cottage at the weekend. And we would sit down together and we would just lead the children through the very, very basics. We weren't going to point fingers and all the rest of it. I slightly missed telling you the only things that my wife wanted if I'd agreed to take the children. My wife wanted the house, and I got the clear impression that she would move her lover into the house because they wanted a long-term relationship together. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that she wanted was me to financially look after her, and I had no problem about that. I mean, my income was considerable at that time. Let's just say that at that stage, just to put it in context, I'm suppose after tax, I suppose I'm putting in the bank £10,000 a month. Okay, just to give you some indication. Yeah. So so money was never a worry, and that's why now I tell you that potentially you could turn around and say, why the hell didn't you pay the money, etc. But let's leave that to one side. That's okay. Yeah. So the agreement on the Thursday was I'd come back at the weekend. I agreed that she'd have the house. I agreed that she would have £3,000 out of my £10,000 because I could look after the children. I could look after the rent for a house on £7,000 a month, etc., etc. Bearing in mind this is 1988. I mean the scale of the money is actually quite substantial. Right.
I get it.
Okay. Yeah. So anyway, the agreement was that I'd come back at the weekend. That was on the Thursday, right? Mm-hmm. So now I'm in full family mode. I'm having to tie down the loose ends with leases on the lease on the house. There are problems because the inventory was wrong, and you know how you got to be so careful with these things. I was tying down the loose ends with the school in the Steiner School in Hertfordshire. I was also trying to do my job, although I'm very glad to say that I was able to call on 4 of my managers who reported directly into me and ask, because they knew me very well, and I asked those 4 people to actually cover for me while I dealt with a personal situation. Mm-hmm. Where I now come to Saturday, I think it was Saturday-ish. I now come to Saturday, heading from the hotel in St Albans, heading across to the Cotswolds, because the lease was not actually due to be signed until, I think it was this must have been. I'm trying to think of the lease wasn't actually ready to sign before I went to collect the children. But when I collected the children and came back to Hertfordshire, I could just drive to the lawyer's office, sign the lease, and take the kids straight into the house, which I'd visited on a number of occasions over the week anyway. Mm. And then I phoned my wife just to update her timescales, etc., etc., etc. And then, of course, Philip came. I'm not quite sure how to explain this to you. It was the end of my world in so many different ways. When I got on the phone, I was just amazed at her attitude, because she was actually she was actually quite a calm person, but she was absolutely roaring, it was quite clear that something had happened. And anyway, she actually informed me on the phone that she had been introduced during the week to a lawyer, a woman who, oh dear, deep breath, David, and we'll just bypass and say, if you were to imagine the worst divorce lawyer who would cross your path, that was this woman.
Okay. So we're talking enter stage left, a thoroughbred divorce lawyer to your look. I could sit back here and going through my mind before you got to this point, going through my mind, I'm thinking, how are the children ever okay with a 48-hour bombshell to their lives? How are the children going to move from the Cotswolds to North London, Hertfordshire, or what have you? How is that ever going to be okay? But it's a little bit unfair for me to do that, because
no, that's good.
You're giving me a brutally honest a brutally honest interpretation of the scenario from your point of view. So it would be unfair of me to kind of pick that out, certainly at this point, because it would entail that you were naive to that situation, because you said there you were going to give them the basics and what have you. And if I was to be sort of lenient to your side of the story, you got the phone call and you were dealing with the situation at hand, which is a very masculine thing to do. Fix the problem. Yeah. Not understand the problem, just fix the problem and move forward as best as possible. But herein lies the a massive detail. We now have a divorce lawyer in. So what was an amicable agreement?
Yep.
We don't have your late wife's version of events. Obviously, she's.
I understand. I don't want to say too much. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So that's where I'll please continue now. So
the reason why I need this 1 week to be so important, because it was from this 1 week that the next 33 years of my life have been so blighted, and vis-a-vis my children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Okay, but the number of it was that during the phone call, which was actually a courtesy phone call I was just making from St Albans, just to let her know that I was on the way across. Everything had changed. The kids were to stay with her. The kids had been informed that I had deserted. Right. The language that she started to use in that phone call was legalese to a level which I immediately recognized. Okay. Yeah. That divorce proceedings were going to be brought against me for desertion. That I had actually, because of my actions, I had actually, what was the way the lawyer phrased it? That I'd actually put at risk the future for my children. That because of that, they were to stay with their mother. Their mother would be seeking sole custody,
yeah. Residency now,
and that I was actually banned. From returning home. And the reason why I was to be banned was because my eldest daughter, who had left school, who was now party to all this. I didn't know about this. A lot of this 33 years Philip, and this is where I am going to hopefully reach out and ring bells with other people who are going through this horrendous situation. A lot of this situation is behind closed doors. You just do not know what's going on. You do not know what's being said to children. You don't know what's being said to family. You don't know what's being said to friends, etc., etc., etc. You just get the result of whatever that secret conversation is. Okay.
Yeah.
So come the weekend, and remember, this is the same week of the Tuesday. I now have a situation where my eldest daughter is actually willing to say in front of the lawyer that at some stage in the past I molested her. So there is a potential, and it was very, very clear. I'm pleased. Let me just hasten to add, before there's any doubt in anybody's mind, I've never laid a hand on my children other than to hug them, etc. Right? There's been nothing like that. But my eldest daughter, who was so close to me, was willing to sit down with a lawyer who she knew nothing about. My daughter was living in London at the time. She was willing to sit down with her daughter in the Cotswolds and give a statement that it was her statement that was going to be used to control me, because that's exactly what happened. Now,
how old is she at this time? At this
18,
point,
18.
She's 18 at this point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now the problem is, Philip, I don't know if this is true. I don't know if still to this day, sure. I don't know if my eldest daughter did that, but that's what I was told. All right.
Yeah.
And I knew full well, I was experienced enough, I knew full well that to have such a thing as that, that accusation, that false accusation to be brought against me, the implications to me personally, among my family, my friends, my career, the implications would have been just devastating. Right. So, now you have every right to criticize me, because I was just so blown away that I just, for that weekend and for the next week, I just backed off. I just didn't know where to go. I consulted lawyers. I thought because I'd done some research about this woman, I thought probably the best thing to do was to get a really top-class leading London lawyer, divorce lawyer, etc. I actually identified and had an initial interview with one, and we got on very well together. But the problem was she wanted a down payment of £50,000, and that was just ridiculous. Okay, so so my
let me ask let me just ask a question. So how were you met with this allegation? Did it happen at this early stage? So you were making all the preparations, etc. Your wife changed her tone from legalese. A phone call, did you say?
Yeah, it was on this phone call where I'm phoning her, just to courtesy call to let her know that I'm leaving the hotel in St Albans and going back. Okay,
so you've never had this conversation with your daughter
subsequent
ever
right.
Okay, now the allegation is a criminal allegation, correct?
Yes. Arrest.
Yes. So what happened?
Right. Well, there's one other aspect which will blow your mind, that this divorce lawyer, and I'm allowed to say this, by the way, although you might stop me. I mean, I've said it.
Your own personal liabilities are your personal liabilities, David. I don't mind what you say.
Okay. Apart from the fact that she was a known man-hater, she would only represent women. It emerged remarkably that that she was a lesbian, and that she had actually, whether they actually had an affair or whether they just had a fling, whatever that the difference means, she'd actually dated my wife a few months before. But that's not the staggering thing.
Okay.
That's not the staggering thing. The staggering thing is this divorce lawyer is married to an inspector of police of Gloucestershire Constabulary.
Right.
And they are and basically I knew, because that accusation was made to me on several occasions when I tried to reach out over the next week. I knew that if, sorry, I must not use her name. If my eldest daughter made that statement, that would go straight to the lawyer's husband as an inspector of police. So it would just be instant.
Okay, so did you feel that you were under like a regime here?
Yes.
Like, were you?
Yep.
So you used the word before, you were under control.
Yep.
At this point, and you say you mustn't use your daughter's name. Is that for any legal reasons, or is that just because of courtesy?
It just slipped. It just courtesy. It just slipped out.
Okay. So
because one of the things which you and I did mention before this particular conversation, I've always done everything in my power to hide my surname, so that my children would not in any way have fingers pointed at them. Sure. Now, it's ironic. Could I tell you why it's ironic? It's ironic because actually, at a period after what we're talking about, this period we're talking about, my wife insisted that my two sons change their surname to her name. So none of my children, none of my grandchildren, none of my great-grandchildren have the Booth family name. So it's just ironic that I didn't actually fully understand that until 2015, when one of my daughters, or two of my daughters, tried to have some kind of a reconciliation. But I'm jumping. So could I just make the point? When the name slipped out, it's just I am living with you.
Yeah.
An event 33 years ago. All right.
Yeah.
But could I just, this next point, this is where you're going to really push me, and I need to give you the control as to how you push me. But okay. From that week onwards, every court, every mechanism, everything that could be done to stop me from seeing my children was done. I was fighting a fight that it just blew my mind. Now, I tried really, really hard. I tried really hard to maintain contact. Wrote letters virtually every day. Sent them Christmas cards, Christmas presents, birthday presents. The sort of things that I would have done had I been there. When I went on business trips, I always used to bring them when we were together, or I used to bring them presents from overseas, and that was the thank you that you might have missed Dad, but Dad's come back with a lovely little present for you, etc., etc. So from that time, so I'm talking about 1988 to 1995, every hurdle that you could imagine was put in my way. Restraining orders. I could go through the detail ad infinitum.
Yeah.
But the point about it was that occasionally I was able to see them. In relatively controlled circumstances. But the problem was that in 1995, I was very, very aware that when they went, and they used to have, even 1995, they used to have, this is 7 years later, right? I used to still have a fabulous relationship with the younger ones. I mean, my eldest son by that time had left home as well, etc. But the point was that every time they met me, they suffered. And in 1995, at their request, not at the request of my ex-wife as she was at that stage, etc., or anybody else, in 1995, they cut off all communication with me, everything, no matter what I tried. So from 1995 to 2015, I was completely alienated from the lives of my 5 children. Didn't see them, didn't hear from them. During that period, they all got married. During that period, and I wasn't invited to weddings, obviously. During that period, they had children, my grandchildren, never met them. Even to this day, even though I have tried very slowly, walking on eggshells to try and build a reconciliation with one of my daughters, one of my sons, who has a wife, who had a son when they married from a previous relationship, but I know that they've had two daughters since then. That son, neither that son nor his wife nor anybody from their family or my grandchildren want to speak to me. I am absolutely verboten as far as that's concerned. But the events that I'm describing in that week is actually the beginning of a process, both through the divorce courts and subsequently, a process that really came to a hiatus in 1995 when literally all contact was broken.
Right. So it's unbelievably familiar, which is the real concern. It's so familiar to hear that that chain of events where everything is sort of rubber stamped on the facade of an allegation. The sort of the undertone of, like, if you battle forward, this allegation, which is a criminal allegation, will be brought to the forefront, and you'll then suffer more. Can you tell me a little bit around what the courts, because you must have gone through, like, so contact orders, you must have how were you represented? Did you find yourself self-representing? Did you look to the courts for reconciliation around this?
Oh, I did every right. Let's just cover this very, very carefully. The town that I lived, the nearest town to me, right, in the Cotswolds, the firm of solicitors, the firm of lawyers representing my wife were the only lawyers in that town. Okay, I mean, there were lawyers that did property dealing, dealing, all that sort of stuff. But these were the
family lawyers.
These were the only family stroke criminal lawyers in the town. So my initial attempt was to try and get everything to London, which obviously was forlorn. Was to be represented by London solicitors, because I realized that they would probably be as brutal as the people against me. But in reality, the only way that I could get this done was by going to either of the two closest cities, which were Gloucester and Cheltenham.
Mhm.
And the interesting thing was that the family lawyers in Gloucester were so in awe of this woman that they all turned me down.
Right.
So I had to involve myself in a lawyer in Cheltenham, and I didn't realize until probably too late, or although I could have done, I didn't realize that they actually just did not have the competency to be able to address something as complex as this. I mean, because there, you will understand, there's 5 children, there's a lot of money, there's this constant thing about how I had deserted and left them with nothing, and et cetera.
A narrative.
Amazing narrative. I mean, I'll give you a little detail that will amaze you. I don't know if amaze you. Through the offices of the lawyer, my wife actually set up a separate bank account. Right, I knew nothing about.
Mm-hmm.
So I would actually pay her through the court or directly to the lawyer into the known bank account. She would actually have that transferred, right? But what she would then do is she would actually provide bank statements, not detailed bank statements, which always appalled me.
Mm.
She would provide a monthly summary bank statement showing no money. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So that although she had a bank account with loads of money in it,
Mm-hmm.
because I'd paid it, she was able to produce in court a bank account which the court were aware of, because it had been declared as part and parcel of the process. So I mean, just little tricks.
So okay, all right. So was that then used to suggest that you weren't paying the money?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So it was suggested that you weren't paying the money. Okay. So being screwed over in the family courts is now standard. is I mean, like, it was probably standard at that point, but she was obviously pioneering in the 80s what we have today as family law, and producing a narrative against the husband,
Yes.
vilifying him, demonizing him, etc., which is all fun and games for the lawyers.
Yes.
Okay, however, it's decimated your family.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
It's taken. Now, this isn't me saying, oh, what a great dad you were. This is so unfair. There will be elements, okay, there will be things that you win and there'll be things that you lose. Yes. Choosing the paths that you choose.
Yes.
Now, if you're commuting for 3 hours a day, on the basis that
5 hours a day, yes.
five, maybe even 6, right?
Yep.
So 6 hours a day, commuting in and out of London or what have you, for however many years that goes on for, international trips, etc.
Yep.
You will always lose the ability to bond with your children as much as if you didn't do that.
Yes.
Okay. So guilty. Yeah. We all have those things that
I need to be careful, because I'm going to give you controversial. Let's get a little bit controversial. From the very beginning of my family, the creation of my family, I always knew, because of what I agreed with my wife, that I would be the sole provider.
Yep.
The need to maintain a very high level of income. I'm talking about private schools for 5 kids. No, I know they weren't Eton and all the rest.
No.
I understand that, but
It's okay. And I think I get that. I think I'm giving you that.
The pressure on me was such that I knowingly chose career ahead of my children, only because I knew that as soon as I failed in the provision of income, provision of a home, a decent life, etc., I knew that I would be dumped. I knew that would happen. Okay, so there was a pressure on me to do this activity. The reason why I'm challenging you is because there are many parents I've met in relatively similar circumstances to me. There are many parents I met who would have given their back teeth to have spent more time with their children.
Yes.
And there are parents. I think we jokingly said, maybe in a 4-bedroom council house, wouldn't it have been fantastic, etc. And the answer would have been, it's a brutal answer. The answer would have been, were I to have even suggested to my wife at the time, we're going into a council house, I would have been out the door.
Look, let me be really clear when I say this. I'm not saying it's your fault, but I'm saying it's a byproduct of the life that you've lived, that not everything is going to be airtight. Not everything, you're not going to be in control of absolutely everything. By definition, that so much was going on behind your back that you didn't even know about.
Yes.
Right? Okay, so therein lies the crux of it. You're fulfilling your obligation, and your promise to your wife is not a criticism of the outcome of your marriage, as far as I'm concerned.
Right. But it is something that I'm aware of, that it would have, not having had my children in my life for 20, 25 years, it is the only time in assessing the past that I really stop and have to think. Had I put them first, as a lot of, I mean,
let me caveat it like this, David, to make it easier for you. I'm not asking you to explain.
Sure.
So what I'm saying is that you are responsible for you and your actions. Your wife is responsible for her and her actions. So therein lies the detail. Once the children are being manipulated away from you, you no longer have the power or control or the responsibility over the outcomes that happen as a result of that being put into place. So I'm not saying that because you did this, it's partly your fault the way things have turned out for you.
Sure. No.
Not at all.
Okay. No, I would accept, but you see, I'd accept that because let's be brutally honest. I had a failed marriage. I am the first person in my family to have gone through divorce. Right? Okay. And it's a big family, right? I am the first person in my family through the generations to have gone through divorce. And that, I don't want to go into that because I don't think it's relevant. But I tell you something, in the family, my family, that actually impacted.
It's very relevant.
Okay. But could I just make one thing clear? The circumstances which we were talking about, which was what happened in court, right? That got 20 times, 100 times, 1,000 times worse, because during 1988, that's why, when the divorce action was beginning, etc., unbeknownst to me, somebody who was chasing me dubiously, could I say this, and you will smile because you'll think, oh God, he's defending himself. But it was a dubious debt. Somebody was pursuing me for a debt through the Gloucester courts, initially the Magistrate Court and then Gloucester Crown Court. But all the communication was going to my marital home. They weren't aware that I'd moved. All right. Now the significance of this is I'll deal with this very quickly, please. The significance of this was that through the latter half of 1988, I was totally unaware that I was being pursued through the Magistrate Court because nothing was being forwarded to me.
Yeah.
Right? I was unaware that anything was being I was being pursued through the Magistrate Court, and when there was no response, they had
a county court judgment,
Crown Court, and I was made bankrupt in February of 1989 without ever knowing that there was a case against me, and the claim debt was for £3,000 at a time when my after tax income was £10,000 a month. Okay, so you'll understand how stupid it was. Yeah. Now the implication of that is that was used against me in the divorce courts. That was used against me with the children. That was used against me with friends, with family, etc. Look at this bastard. Not only did he desert us and but he's also now a bankrupt, right? So you'll understand that the ammunition against me is absolutely unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. Even to this day, my one of the rare times that in this eggshell reconciliation process that I'm going through with my daughter, on one occasion, and I know he let it slip, right? Her husband, my son-in-law, who they've been together 18 years, and I've only known them for the 17 years, and I've only known him for 4 years. All right. Yeah. He let slip to me face to face. Of course, you're a bankrupt. It was just such a. It was just such a barb.
I call that
such a barb that came to me. So I'm well aware that all my indiscretions. Real, because I'm not an angel, real or imagined. All of my indiscretions have just been multiplied, grown, they've been twisted, and they've etc. etc. Now I tell you that because in my conversations with PASG and some of the professionals, especially some of the psychiatrists in America, I'm well aware that is something which they run into the whole time, that the smallest story, even if it's not invented, is just blown out of all proportion, and that happened to me. So I've got this the whole time.
I've had a number of conversations. So to all intents and purposes, my ears are very sympathetic to this whole thing, and there's a lot of similarities to if you look at the podcast and you hear the countless number of stories that are told in the alienation, there's always a real similarity between how the story starts, between two people that love each other, and procreate with each other, and it always ends up that person is, lo and behold, a monster. Okay, so they grow into this. So when you have that kind of journey of somebody you love to being to all intents and purposes perceived to have had that person betray you so
Yes.
magnificently
Yep.
through the narrative of the lawyers and the alienating parent,
Yep.
it becomes even worse if you were to challenge it, because there's a even deeper, darker truth to behold. So who wants to open that box?
Correct.
Nobody
Correct.
wants to open that box. It's
Correct.
easier to believe the narrative, even if it's a half truth from the side of the mouth,
Yes.
than actually giving the person the platform to
Could I take it?
go
Because
over
you've just made an absolutely vital part of what our conversation I had hoped would be about, right? And that is what I've suddenly realized, and this is actually relatively recently, what I've suddenly realized is that my children have believed what they were told about me. How they can believe that I, as their father, that they knew, right, could do it, I'm not sure about. But could I tell you the point that I want to make? The implication is that they've now got children of their own, that the children, my grandchildren, the children, because they're naturally inquisitive, where's our family from, blah, 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 blah. Well, father can tell their father can tell a complete story about the background of his family, blah. Mother can't. Mother has to be very careful, but sometimes mother will actually tell, will actually repeat some of the allegations, accusations, etc. Here's the problem I have to face: that actually, when my children realize that they've been lied to, but have now told the lie onward, they're boxed in. Yeah. They're in a corner. Yeah. They cannot admit that what they said 5 years ago, 3 years ago, last week, they cannot admit that lie is based, or that story. Sorry, I'm not going to accuse them of lying.
Okay.
That story is
That's
based.
That's probably a fairer way of putting it. Yeah.
Right. So what I realize is that as we go on, and that's why I'm so concerned about the grandparent element. Okay. As we go on, we actually are, instead of just facing an alienator in the child scenario, you're actually now facing alienators, accidental though they might be, in the grandparent area. Okay. And one of the reasons, Philip, and I'd love you and your listeners, please, just to hold this very, very carefully. One of the reasons why the grandparent alienation is such a dangerous path, not only because of what we've already talked about, the fact is that the children the grandchildren don't know family history, have no knowledge of where their heritage is, and blah, 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 blah. But the real problem is that for part of the young life of my children, I hugged them, I touched them, they laughed with me, they played with me, they participated in all the lovely fun and games that we had together. They appreciated, because they lived in beautiful houses, they had lovely clothes, blah, blah, etc. They actually, at some stage, they know, because up here in the back of their mind somewhere, there's a little grey cell that says, once upon a time, I actually had fun with Dad, right? For our grandchildren, that's never happened. They have no knowledge of the alienated grandparent other than as a name, and probably as a name that's not particularly hunting. So with the children, there's always a memory of the alienated mother or the alienated father. And I apologize. I need we've gone on a wee while now. I must make one thing quite clear. I know how hard mothers, what mothers have to face. Okay, when I started reaching out to PSG in America, I was surprised how the father's story was told, etc. I only challenged that and realized that the mother's story hasn't been well told and needs to be better told. But can I tell you, whether it's an alienated mother or an alienated father, once you get to the grandchildren stage, they know nothing about you. In fact, my first visit, I'm trying to make this something that will help people. My first visit to my daughter, who is tentatively reaching out, and I have to tread on eggshells, and I can only reach out because she will not talk about anything in the past. Okay, not talk about anything. The shock was when I walked into their lovely house. This is when they were living in Paris. Beautiful big house. It's stuffed with photographs. It's stuffed with pictures on the walls, etc., 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 etc. Right? There's siblings, children, there's friends, etc. Blah, 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 right? All over the house, there's their mother. Not one photograph of their father, and that took my breath away, because it's as if I'm completely eliminated. And I can understand why a grandchild, looking at all these photographs, living with all these photographs, oh, who's that, mummy? Who's that, daddy? Right, etc. On no occasion can they point to a picture of me and say, oh, and for my son-in-law or my daughter to say, oh, that's your grandpops. All right, bang. And I shared with you. I don't want to draw this on too much, because you're devoting a lot of time. I shared with you a poem. Look, from my little 7-year-old.
Just on that. Just before you go into that, we've got all the time it takes. I don't want you to rush. I don't want you to leave anything out. I've probably got a few more questions as well. Honestly, don't worry about that at all. But please. But
the important thing is, when I started to go through, I define it reconciliation, but it's nothing like the accepted reconciliation process that, for example, the psychiatrists and all the professionals use in other countries. Probably they use it in this country. I hope they do. But I know there are reconciliation processes.
Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question then. Okay, seeing as you mentioned reconciliation. Okay, so Greenfield approach. I'm sure that's a term that you're familiar with in the computing industry. Greenfield approach. What does reconciliation look like to you?
Reconciliation is my daughter and my son, but the sons are even worse. Right? My daughter. Let's take one daughter. For that one daughter and her family.
The daughter in line with the allegation?
No, that one daughter and that family, husband and 3 children, to absolutely accept me, to be able to talk to me about my family. I've never talked about my family to them. Be able to talk about my experiences, this huge wealth of experience that I'd love to share with these kids. I mean, my of this family I'm talking about, the granddaughter's 16 now. She's at that wonderful age when she's
Curiosity.
inquiring and trying to, etc., etc., etc. She knows nothing about me. Not allowed to talk about anything to do with my family, etc., etc. Right? Yeah. And in a way, the green field would be an opportunity. That probably that's the equation. An opportunity as a grandfather to be accepted, fully accepted, with all members of that one family, to be able to have a normal and natural grandparent relationship. That's a green field.
Sounds like a good start. Sounds like a good start. I pray and I genuinely hope that maybe this podcast goes some way to sort of grease those wheels that have been still for so long, and I truly hope that it helps to move your life forward and your wishes forward with your children and your grandchildren. Now, David, you briefly alluded to a poem that you've written and you wanted to recite.
Just mention it. Purely and simply,
okay.
because the interesting thing about it was that before she didn't know me. She's 7 years old. Okay, she didn't know me. I met her just before her 8th birthday, and we had a lovely. I was over in Paris for a weekend, and the two of us, my little granddaughter and I, took the dog out for a walk, and so it was just the two of us. Loads of chat, because she will be the ideal opportunity for the bridge building to start, because she has not had that much of the implications of the manipulation. And we had this lovely conversation where she actually started to talk about her nonna, her grandmother, my ex-wife, in such incredible terms. How good. I didn't incorporate all these terms into the poem, but she talked how good Nonna was, how fantastic Nonna was at helping people. She talked about the fact that Nonna did so much work for other people in the community, did work for immigrants and stuff like that. It was a picture of an angel, all right?
Yeah.
Picture of an angel.
I mean, that's a wonderful memory for a grandchild to have of her grandmother.
Wait. I need to stop you. And then, of course, it came to the fact that one of the bits that she couldn't understand is, she was never allowed to meet me. She only realized that I existed because her mother was going to told her that, oh, your grandfather is coming across to Paris to meet us. And when she asked about grandfather, and I'm not quite sure where this came from, the picture that this 7-year-old, I have to underline this 7-year-old, this picture that was painted, well, this is actually quite an evil man, a devil, a demon. Nonna didn't want you to meet him, whatever, right? Whatever was put in the mind of this 7-year-old, I was a shock,
right?
Because we clicked and connected and all the rest of it. Here's the problem, Philip. Here's the problem. Her nonna died when she's a 1-year-old baby.
Yeah.
How the hell? Who has actually inculcated her with all this rubbish? All right.
Yeah.
So the alarm that read for me, and that's why I wanted to share it with your contacts.
Yeah.
The alarm for me is, this is going to be something that other grandparents are going to come across. And to be fair, one of the main reasons you and I want to talk to you today is because if I could reach out to a grandparent who is going through this thing, if I could actually reach out to a grandchild who's going through this thing and give them pause and make them think, then your investment in time and my investment of time will be great. I'm not sure if I'm going to get anything out of this. I will want you to understand one thing very, very clearly. I will never stop loving my children. I'll never stop loving my grandchildren, even though I don't know them. I will never, ever, ever give up hope, because I know full well that we live in a world where suddenly, almost overnight, things change. But the reason why I raised the poem is because the danger that really needs to be flagged to the legislatures, the danger that needs to be flagged to people who are considering this. This isn't a parental. This isn't about mothers and fathers. This is actually even worse when it gets to the next generation. Generational. Because they actually are now so remote from the grandparent that the bridge will probably never be. I mean, I've told you I've got 9 grandkids, 2 great grandkids. I doubt if I will ever meet my great grandkids. I still have to meet 6 of my 9 grandkids. I doubt if I will ever meet 2 of those grandkids from my youngest son. I doubt if I'll ever meet them ever again in my life. I still have hope, but that, and that's, and in a way, if you talk to parents about this alienation, I need, please, if you could pass on messages, whatever it is you have the strength to do. When it gets to the grandparent generation, this whole thing is absolutely disastrous. And courts have got to understand, legislators have got to understand, when they make decisions, what for a court is a very simple decision, right? The repercussions over the years are just so unbelievable. I mean, I'm talking about. So I thought.
Well, you're living proof of that, David. You're living proof of the ramifications of a lawyer's actions for a client are nothing short of sort of Wild West gunslinging.
Thank you.
In regards to the ramifications as to what it leads, not just for what she achieved on that day or in those months, but here we are, the ripples moving out to today, to you having such a sad and tragic twilight to what was such an effort that you put in for your family to be left to this.
Could I tell you? And this is where I'm going to lose people, because people are going to get angry with me. Could I tell you one thing? I would not change one thing about what has happened to me, because everything that happened to me happened in the actual moment. I can't look back, and I don't think anybody should look back and say if only, because that's it's too late. You just have to move on. And in my experience, you're talking to an old man now. In my experience, the hope for grandparents is that at some stage, the general, maybe the general public. I'll tell you what I'm really waiting for. Philip. I want to hear the life stories of the children. Yeah. I want them to be on your podcast. I want. There won't be many grandchildren because parental alienation really as an issue. It started in the lifetime of my alienation. There was no such thing as parental alienation 33 years ago. Well, I could be wrong.
No, I think you possibly are wrong about that, and I think there are multi-generational issues that have happened through these. But it's not. I mean, it's not wrong for you to suggest that, because who wants it to be an issue at all? You know,
Sure.
nobody. But
Sure.
in regards to people losing you, I don't think people are going to lose you on the basis that you would not change anything. I don't think you've got anything to be apologetic for, in the fact that you love your children, you
Yes.
love your grandchildren,
Yes.
you want them in your life, and I don't think that anything that you have done in the past warrants the removal of you from their lives, or from them from your lives. So you know, no matter how you slice it or dice it, the removal of you from their lives is a tragedy.
Yes.
And having to sort of be a child that's on the receiving end of that, the fear that the fear and confusion and frustration that must have been felt and then quashed over those years, I can only, you know, take a deep breath and just feel such dread and remorse for what those young children would have gone through in order to have come to terms with moving forward in their lives, and having to now reconcile the removal of you rather than dealing with the possibilities that you exist.
Correct. And in that instance that you've just reflected, it's only when they start to open their minds to that aspect that they suddenly realize that actually this wasn't a solo individual who did this to them.
Yeah.
This was family and friends and the system. This was a whole raft of people who provided a support mechanism to hide the truth from them, or whatever. And that's quite a blow to them.
In many ways, David, I want to forget about the peripherals.
Okay.
I want to forget about, to a degree, I want to forget about the friends and the other influences, and I want to look at the scared children going through their parents being torn apart so viciously by what is accountable is the system of that. You know, to say it's acceptable for you to be vilified and thrown away and disappeared, over those children having a loving father, whether it be in a relationship via a weekend arrangement, but to not be able to know you and to love you and to continue those relationships is
that's it,
abhorrent.
I agree.
Wow, we didn't even get onto your fitness regime.
COVID has interrupted it. Pre-COVID, so January of last year, 6 3-hour sessions per week, 2 3-hour sessions with a personal coach, who I'm very grateful for his contribution, because he is actually the multidiscipline coach for the Scottish national team. So he's the one that
Rugby?
No. This is athletics.
Oh, okay.
This is athletics. So because I'm a master athlete, and I do shot put, javelin, and I do discus. But because of the need to do the amount of training I do, I also have to do a lot of running. But because of my age, I only run 100 yards, 100 meters. I've got to say this these days. But up to the beginning of COVID, it was just unbelievable. I was just so fit, and COVID has made this huge dent, because the athletic stadium has been closed down, the gyms have been closed down. I couldn't meet my coach on a face-to-face basis, etc. And training on your own, Philip, is a lonely process, I can tell you that.
Yeah, I try to avoid it. Best I can. Yeah.
Anyway.
In fact, if I'm winning at anything, it's avoiding the gym.
Yeah, bless you. Bless you. Have we come to a
David,
natural?
I think we have come to an
Yeah, I think
absolutely
so.
natural conclusion. We've got loads on here, so it's going to take some ploughing through or what have you. But let me thank you, David Booth, for contributing to the Philip Maloney podcast so eloquently, so honestly, and with that wonderful Scottish accent, which I'm sure our viewers and listeners are going to enjoy immensely. So once again, thank you very much, David Booth.
Thank you, Philip. Stay safe, everybody, please.
Bless you.
On a train, in a bus, in a car, on the way to your job. All alone with your kids, with your wife, or with your dog. You can listen anywhere, you can listen everywhere, to the Philip Maloney podcast.